Excellent. And we should be live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our very first Feedback Friday with your lovely hosts, Robert and myself. Robert, how's your Friday going so far?
It's going great. I am excited to talk about this excerpt that we have.
Yeah, I'm very excited for it. I do feel a little bad because it is, what is 9 o'clock for you? It's bright and early in the morning. So,
Well, not that early, but yeah. I feel bad for anyone who wants to watch from like California, but
yeah. Or someone where it's midnight or something.
yeah.
All right, so this is our very first Feedback Friday, and the format of this is a little different than our usual events. What we're doing for this one is we put out the call for Dabble users to submit a piece that they would like to receive feedback, to get line editing and beta reading feedback. Hello, TW. And for all the submissions that we got, unfortunately, we could only pick one to look over. I wish we could do them all, but we could only do one. And what happened is I provided line editing feedback on it, and Robert, as the beta reader, is providing beta reader feedback. And
Mhm.
so what we're going to do is we'll first, share whose submission that we went over, and I'll give a brief recap on it. And then Robert's going to talk about beta reader feedback, what he liked, what he didn't like, where room for improvement could be. And then from a line editing perspective, I don't want to show the entire document. I don't think that's fair to the person who submitted it, despite how great it was. But I do have a deck put together to highlight some areas where they both excelled and where people can learn, as we do this together. So the excerpt that we chose at random from a lottery style draw was The Moonlight Ferryman, and this was submitted by Jaden. And before you get into your thing, Robert, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this excerpt. I'm very thankful that Jaden submitted this, and I even put in the comment that they'll be receiving back that I look forward to reading the full thing once they're finished writing. So
Yeah. No, I also really liked it. The voice was amazing. So it was
immaculate.
very fun. It was slightly sarcastic,
Mhm.
which is totally my cup of tea. And so yeah, I really enjoyed it. So
Excellent. And for the folks at home watching on with us, this excerpt, the premise was that we have these two characters. We have Dessa and we have Sruki, and they have a past relationship. They've been together. They're now separate, and there's some tension there. And at least one of them is a reaper, someone that deals with souls, and it seems like the other was a reaper in a former life, not literal former life, but just the past. And this is where Struki is seeking out Dessa to get some help because there's too many souls hanging around, and that's concerning. So, yeah. All right, and Hank has us live on Instagram and Facebook, and we're on YouTube and Twitter. We are everywhere. Wherever you are, we are, and we hope that you get some valuable information from this, because that's the whole point of this Feedback Friday, is not just to benefit the one person who gets the feedback, but to benefit everyone from giving us a glimpse into the process of getting feedback. I know a lot of people are scared of that process, and like scared is a very apt term because it is scary to let someone into something as personal as writing, but also just to learn from the things that we see popping up, especially from an editing perspective, things that pop up again and again in all authors' work, so that you can learn to identify it on your own. So, enough rambling from me. Robert, your beta reader feedback overall on this.
yeah, totally. And just as a point of how to take beta reader feedback, kind of the way that we will structure this is that I, as a beta reader, my entire goal is to give you my emotional responses to your excerpt, to what you've wrote. And so I try and stay as far away from being prescriptive, as in like, oh, you should change this way, or oh, you should change that this way, and just give you my like knee jerk, here's how this made me feel kind of reactions. And I think it's really important to note that whatever Doug and I say Doug's word you should probably take a little bit more seriously than mine, just because my feedback is beta reader feedback. And sometimes you'll get a beta reader who maybe just doesn't get what you're trying to write or didn't quite understand a portion of the scene. And that's important feedback to take. If I'm not reacting in the way that you intended to the scene that you wrote, then that might be something where you need to clarify that scene a little bit or make it a little bit easier to understand for a wider audience. But it might also just be that, it just didn't click for me. And so, um, in that case, I just want to point out, like, don't stress too much about the feedback. And yeah, so to get started, I just wanted to start with the things that I loved about this piece. And the very first thing, just in general, as Doug mentioned previously, was the voice that they used when writing this. Like I said, there's just a hint of a little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of like just I don't know how else to explain it. Just a fun sense of humor in the way that they describe the situations that these characters find themselves in. Um, and so that is, there are just some brilliantly written sentences here that really jump out at me. And for example, one that I really enjoyed is it's a description of like the head of a mercenary guild. It seems like I think the character's name is Leica. And Leica responds to one of the characters, basically Sruki and Dessa. And Sruki is talking to Leica, the head of this mercenary group, trying to track down where Dessa is. And Leica responds, pretty sure she's dead, maybe. And then the response to that is, historically, this isn't an outlandish conclusion to draw. Leica has had many members of his guild die in the middle of nowhere with no one the wiser. Unfortunately, he has yet to take that trend as evidence that his management skills need work. That was just beautiful. That was so fun and so funny, and just such a great descriptor. And there's further description of Leica as like on his third tankard of ale or something. And so it's just like this guy who's like, kind of that terrible manager, but in a mercenary sense kind of thing. And that was really, really fun. And so, yeah, that kind of style is just kind of everywhere in your descriptions, in what you wrote. And it's just really, really fun.
What I will say before we leave that point, just for the people at home here, if this kind of style, I'd call it a Hitchhiker's Guide tone or voice. Is very
Yeah, that's
reminiscent
great.
of that book. And when you have that kind of sassy, sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek going on, it allows you to drop a little more exposition in your prose than you otherwise normally would. Because it has that little sass to it, it makes it fun reading it. If this had been a more serious, like I write dark fantasy, if it had been my tone writing this and I had just dropped that in there, it would have felt out of place and would have felt a little cumbersome. But because Jaden nailed the tone, then it fits right in. So that's just, how important tone and your voice is when it comes to what you can write in your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's an apt description of this tone and voice. But yeah, another thing that I loved was the characters. I think that Dessa, I'll give you guys a quick rundown, but Dessa is kind of she's a mercenary, and she is she's got something going on. Clearly, she's getting in fights. She's very the Taylor Swift lyric "Down Bad Crying at the Gym" feels very appropriate to the description of Dessa. But Dessa is like a tough mercenary, and so it's kind of, it even says that Dessa self-admittedly is emotionally repressed, and so Dessa's got something going on emotionally. It seems to have something to do with her relationship with Sruki, although it's not explicitly stated that that's all of what's going on. But Dessa's a brilliant character. I think that she's very interesting, and I love having flawed characters, especially out of the gate, where Dessa is, being very moody and a little frustrating in her interactions with Sruki. But then the fun part is Sruki is like this immortal being of some sort that is like beyond description. And because of that, Sruki and Dessa's relationship works really well because Sruki is trying to convince Dessa to come and help her with this quest of figuring out where all the Reapers are going. So it seems that some of the premise is that there are souls that are sticking around too long. And Sruki used to be a Reaper, and there are fewer Reapers around for some reason. And so Sruki is trying to convince Dessa to help her figure out what's going on there. And so that's a really good inciting incident for me. That was very interesting. But it all happens in this character interaction. And so I think that is the fun part, is you can tell that Sruki knows Dessa well because Sruki kind of pushes Dessa's buttons in the right way to try and get her to come along and help and find ways to like to get her to do what Sruki wants. And Sruki's also not like this perfect soul. Like it seems like, Dessa is a mercenary and Sruki offers payment. And then there's a little note that like Sruki doesn't actually have the money, but she would handle that later because she knows how Dessa works. And little things like that where it's just fun to see like these characters are clearly flawed, but not like in any huge major way. Not that major flaws are a problem, but I find myself rooting for them. I do want them to succeed in this quest. I want their relationship to work out because it does seem that even on Sruki's side, Sruki tends to depend on Dessa in some ways. And yeah, so I think that the characters themselves and the character interaction feels very real, feels very believable, and very fun. So, Any further notes on that, Doug?
Just that flawed characters, for people writing their own characters, it's so important to make them have flaws, especially your main characters. They don't need to be super flawed, like all of them. From this excerpt, there's a part here where Jaden wrote, Dessa, much like a tumbleweed, has a severe allergy to setting down roots. Sruki has a profound inability to perceive time in a way that isn't measured in mass casualty events. That is that's just fantastic, right? And that clearly highlights their flaws in a way that is not like explicit, like, oh, Dessa's irresponsible and doesn't like commitment. No, you use a great literary device there to really drive this point home and sound like poetic in a way, even though one part says mass casualty event, while showing us, hey, these aren't perfect people, right? And that makes them more interesting. So
yeah, I totally agree. Okay, and then one other thing that I really enjoyed was the setting. I think it's an interesting place to hang out. The few little details that we got, that there are souls that are sticking around after people die, and there are more of them than usual, and there seems to be a disappearance of the Reapers. I kind of touched on that before. We only got a little bit of world building detail. We got a lot of detail on their relationship, which I do think is the right place to focus for this opening chapter, just to get us invested in the characters. But I think the inciting incident and kind of the setup and the setting, I think is working for me. Obviously, I'm a fantasy buff. I love any fantasy story, and so all of that was really compelling to me. So I am kind of your target audience with this piece. So you do have that going for you. But that is another thing that I really enjoyed about this piece. So
excellent.
Okay. And then just some areas of improvement. And I think for this one, this is, again, I'm just giving emotional feedback. And so I'm not going to get into specific line edits stuff, that's Doug's job. So I'll pass the baton on to him shortly. But kind of the biggest area of improvement, especially in the opening scene, is I just had a hard time piecing together where we were in terms of like where the scene is happening. And so, just for some context for anyone who hasn't read this piece, which will be everyone except Jaden. So, but for some context, the opening lines are brilliant. They're super great. It's all about Dessa's inability to describe Sruki's face, mostly because Sruki doesn't seem to have a describable face. Seems to be some kind of immortal being of like a changing form, perhaps. Yeah, we got some beautiful descriptions of Sruki and how that face might be tough to describe. And it talks a lot about how Dessa reacts to seeing Sruki's face, and a lot about like it sets up that relationship tension, which I think is really good. And I honestly wouldn't change much about the opener, but I would love just a few sentences sprinkled in to tell me where Dessa is, like maybe after the first paragraph, because the very first hint that I get of where Dessa is that a fist comes and clocks her squarely in the jaw, and then stars twinkle from the ceiling of the tavern. And so I find out that she's in a bar fight much later. And that was like, it was just a little hard to place the character in scene for me, starting out. And there, a lot of it goes into this hypothetical attacker, which is a great way to kind of put it all together. For context for everyone else, the way that Dessa kind of goes on about just her inability to describe Sruki is by saying if she were like if there was somebody holding a knife to her, she would not be able to describe accurately what Sruki looks like. But then goes into the few things that Dessa could describe about Sruki, which reveals some of that relationship tension that we have. And so, especially in that first scene, it doesn't need to be much, for me at least, but just a little hint that as we're kind of going through this very long description of Dessa's inability to describe Sruki, I would have loved just a sentence or two to kind of ground me as the reader in the scene that's actually happening. And so then once the fist comes and clocks her squarely in the jaw, then I will be able to foresee that coming. I do think it is a fun surprise, but even just little things about like Dessa's experience, like if she has blood in her mouth or something else, just tell me about Dessa's current experience outside of just being excited to see Sruki. But again, this is just beta reader feedback, and so that may be good advice to heed. It may not be totally necessary, and so, but then kind of the rest of my feedback in terms of areas of improvement come back to that of I find myself, and again, this is most likely because I'm an epic fantasy reader, right? And so I have a higher tolerance to world building than most. But I do feel that I, again, kind of had a hard time placing the characters in scene. We get a lot of beautiful descriptions. We get a lot of beautiful language, tone, and voice. I would just love a little bit more detail on where the characters are and what the setting is. Just a little bit. I don't think it would require much for me to be able to place them in scene a little better. But that would be my primary area of improvement. And then Yeah, other than that, my final area of improvement is there are a few spaces, which I'm sure Doug will bring up because that's his job. But there are a few areas in here that got a little wordy and were a little tricky for me to get through and fully understand, like on first read through, which is totally normal for a first draft or even like a fifth draft, especially for me. It requires many, many drafts for me to get from, what is coming out of my head into actually like, really tight prose. Um, but yeah, I think a wordy style is okay. I think for a lot of these sections, it would not require any heavy edits. I think that on the whole, this piece is really well written, and I really really enjoyed it. But there are just a few sections that were a little wordy. So, any follow up on that, Doug?
Nothing that won't give away the goose that I'm about to share. I think that's a term, give away the goose. I don't know.
I don't know either.
That's my flaw. It. I agree though that there were such excellent character dynamics and back and forths and use of voice that the not just the world building but just the setting establishment fell a little to the wayside. So I think because again I'm wrapping it back to people watching this who don't know exactly what we're talking about. As you're writing your own drafts, think about if you're laying it on too heavy in one area or another. Like as we're writing, we need to balance out dialogue and our own author voice and action and setting and theme to lay it all onto that, and then subtext and nuance and everything going into that. And Jaden did an excellent job with a lot of those, and it's just setting kind of fell away a little bit, and I often found myself wondering, okay, where are we? Like what? Just give me just 2-3 details here and there, like you said. It doesn't need to be in depth. I don't need to know the color of the barkeep's hair and what the smell of the grog is that they're serving. Like I just need something to anchor these characters in.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say that is one of the advantages of getting beta reader feedback is a beta reader, when you are writing something, you know exactly where they are, like you can picture exactly what the setting is. And sometimes it's hard when you're just editing your own work or trying to perfect your own drafts
Hmm.
that, to you it's extremely clear because you are the one who came up with the setting and you know exactly what the space looks like. And so that's one of the reasons that beta readers can be an invaluable resource, is because then we have no idea what it looks like, and so if it's not quite clear, then that's a great way to figure that out, is with beta readers. So
Yeah. And I just dropped a link to a W article for the YouTube and Facebook chatters that links to how to use beta reader feedback. And that's an excellent article that even for people who have worked with beta readers before, this can help refine your process. Um, all right, shall we move on to line
yeah,
editing?
take it away.
Excellent. I'm gonna pop this up here for us. Feedback Friday, Moonlight Ferryman, again, the name of the work that Jaden sent to us. This was the opening chapter. So what we read right off the bat was the very start of the book, which is an exciting time because openings are really hard to get. But I just want to share that when you get feedback, because I want to give you this insight, this is what it's going to look like. Admittedly, not so zoomed out, but I want to, get as much as you can. I think for this, it was 3,100 words, 3,400 words, and I left something like 60 pieces of feedback throughout. So for anyone who does work with an editor, whether it be copy editing, line editing, or structural editing, you will get a lot of feedback, and I don't want that to come across as a bad thing. And I don't want you to think that you've messed up because you've gotten a lot of feedback. It's literally the job of the person that you've hired to point out areas for opportunity or things that you've done really well. Which leads to the second point that I want to bring up is that an editor isn't just there to make you feel like you bad about what you've written and just point out your flaws. A part of my editing process is pointing out where you've done exceptionally well, not just to make you feel good, because sometimes I do feel bad just saying this needs to be changed and this needs to be changed and this needs to be changed. So buffing up the confidence is a good thing, but also so you can see, okay, this works really well. I should emulate this more going forward. Or I should adopt this kind of style more than I am just the once or twice. So remember that when you're examining your own feedback. For Jaden's work, the opening is this is the example of voice that you used, Robert, and I just want to share it with everybody here. And it says, the face that steals Dessa's attention is indescribable. If pressured for a description with a knife to her back, she could not tell her rude and utterly clueless attacker what the person's eye color was, nor the length of her hair, nor said hair's shade beyond an ambiguous dark that could encompass anywhere from auburn to pitch black. The texture she could manage, though she imagines her attacker would soon grow bored of her waxing poetic, the exact consistency of follicle that allows for long waves to flow down her back like a waterfall, and what it feels like to run her fingers through the tangled strands. It is art. That is such a
Mm-hmm.
good opening. It doesn't paint the picture of exactly where Dessa is, but it does such a good job of sharing how because a few lines later, Dessa says like it's her favorite person's face, but that's what Struki is. Struki's her favorite person. She doesn't need to memorize these exact details, or maybe her details are shifting or ambiguous or what have you, but this is how much this person means to Dessa and how overwhelming just seeing her is compared to even somebody having a knife to her back, or as we learn in a couple lines, getting socked in the face.
Yeah,
So
totally.
this exceptional.
Yeah, and just to clarify, like I said when I was giving feedback on this first section, I do think this first paragraph is art, and I don't think I would add any details of the setting or anything here. I think this can stay exactly where it's at, and I would just like a detail on, I would love to know that she's totally ignoring
Hmm.
the fist that is shortly coming her way, or something like that,
Yeah,
shortly after this paragraph, just to set me in the scene. So.
yeah. So yeah, so this when I highlighted this in the text, just great, just very well done, establishing your own unique voice, which is something
Mhm.
you don't. Not every author needs to go this hard establishing their voice in the opening paragraph, but it is a great thing if you're able to do it, especially with such a unique voice. Then I want to look at this original excerpt and talk about the flow of it. So that last one is especially vexing, though most likely only to Dessa and not to the hypothetical attacker. This hypothetical attacker, as a side note, is probably regretting their life choices that have led them to this torturous moment of being the unwilling audience of a pent up crush 3 years in the making. There's a lot to like in this, and I think it can stand on its own, but the repetition of hypothetical attacker, it works with the voice, but I also changed it so that it flows a little bit better. So this is what the feedback would look like if you're getting it in your document, right? It's just track changes, but I want to show people what that looks like if you've never seen it before. And changing it to that last one is especially vexing, though most likely only to Dessa and not the hypothetical attacker, who, as a side note, is probably regretting their life choices that led them to this torturous moment, and so on. So the change was taking that repetition of hypothetical attacker and making it one sentence, and I think it adds a little bit extra flow and a little bit of extra snark, almost, to that. Robert, do you agree? Do you have differing thoughts? Because I'm not. When it comes to line editing, a lot of it is stylistic, so
Mhm.
not all line edits will be accepted, right? And I think that's important for an author to understand. So, but your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I agree. I think the repetition, especially since it's hypothetical attacker, is just a lot of syllables,
Yep.
and so condensing it, and I agree. I think the flow of just one sentence, I agree, adds that value and gives that a little extra snark, with just being a little more, I don't know, uh, a little more concise with it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Then adverbs. Okay, so some people will tell you adverbs are the worst thing in the world. I disagree with those people. I think there's a place and a time for adverbs. If you read On Writing, not that I can argue with, Mr. Stephen King, but he says adverbs are, I forget the exact words, but essentially it's essentially the devil's words. And then he goes on to use adverbs the next sentence, which is intentional. Don't get me wrong, right? See, he knows what he's doing. He is a greater writer than I. But adverbs can tend to be weak, and especially depending on the adverb. So what you need to look out for when you're doing your own revising or when you're working with a line editor are weaker adverbs that you can replace with either stronger ones or just stronger writing in general. So here, she is so incredibly enamored with seeing this face going on 5 months of deprivation that she quite thoroughly forgets where she is and what she's doing. Again, a really well written line. That's like a theme with this excerpt that we got. It is very well written, but
Mm-hmm.
incredibly, it might seem like a small thing, but if you can change that, it can have even more impact. So I said here, she is so exceedingly enamored. Exceedingly is really only like one step up from incredibly, but it is a little more unique and it's a little more powerful that it works just a tad better. But I also left a comment on that piece of feedback saying even lean into your voice more because we've established such a fun, snarky voice, saying frighteningly enamored or blisteringly enamored. Like those are very contrasting things. Like blistering and enamored shouldn't go together, but I think with this voice it can work.
Mm-hmm.
So so she is so exceedingly enamored with seeing this face. So Robert, do you have thoughts on adverbs?
Yeah, I think adverbs work very well with
Mhm.
Jaren's voice on this, and so I think it has the adverbs add a little bit of snark here and there, and like you said, can provide that contrast and extra detail. And so that's my only point on that.
Mhm.
I agree with you. I think the adverbs certainly have their place. They can be weak, but I think that they are very well used in this piece. So.
Mhm. Adverbs also tend to end up as crutch words for us, which are words that you kind of default to and use more often than you should. And we all have them. Mine tends to be suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening or watching, drop in the chat if you are aware of your own crutch words and what they might be. Because again, we all have them. You're not a bad writer for having crutch words. You're just a writer for having crutch words.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and Robert, you mentioned this, but here's a line. In her more amicable moments, Sruki can acknowledge that her featureless countenance can be discombobulating, even to someone who has met her several times. And the words work individually with this tone, but there's so many syllables in this sentence that once I hit discombobulating, it was just too much for me. And if it's admittedly, I'm reading word by word as a line editor to make sure everything's chef's kiss, right? So I notice this more, but even as a reader, it's encumbering to read all of this. Um, and that's what I said here. Your voice. This is where using your voice could get a little over the top. The number of longer than average words culminating in discombobulating. Right. What I didn't do though, as a line editor, is tell her how she should or how they should switch this, because like Robert said, sometimes it's an emotional reaction. Like beta readers, you're not giving that prescriptive feedback. As a line editor, I can, but in this case, if it involves such a big change as like the entire sentence, I might offer something, or I might say, "Hey, this is just a bit much. Try it again," and then we'll do another round, or we'll hash it out. And I
Mm-hmm.
see TW, I think I'm aware now. Ilsa in the chat, barely is your crutch word. You missed half the live. Oh, yeah, we are a little early today because Robert has a vacation to get to. So he has
Yes.
to catch a plane in a few hours. So
Yeah.
how dare
Yeah.
you,
Most
sir?
most feedback Fridays will be a little later than this one, but we didn't want to miss it. So
Yeah. Yeah, our inaugural one, just extra early.
yeah. But yeah, I
Uh,
will I will second that as in terms of wordiness. And it again, this is a space where editors and beta readers can be really helpful. Is I know sometimes I'm so in love with my own writing that I also go over the top on, I'm just like, I'll be so clever and so fun here, and it is clever and it is fun. But sometimes, in the middle of a scene, or if there's dialogue, as a reader, I just want to get to the next piece of dialogue.
mhm,
And I'm like, again, some people have different levels of um, resistance to that, or like where they're like, "Oh, I love all the snark. Give it all to me."
mhm,
And then others will be like, "Just tell me what's happening. I don't want any extra details." My suspicion is that for Jaren, the audience they're going for is probably somewhere in the middle, and I would consider myself to be somewhere in the middle. But again, like Doug said, this is something, this is the author's choice on how far to go on some of these things. But having a beta reader or an editor tell you like, hey, this was a bit much, or this kind of hindered the pacing a little bit, is exactly where that's kind of a blind spot for me as a writer, is like where am I maybe being too clever and kind of tripping up my story a little bit just to show off how clever I am,
Hmm.
or just like, or am I just having too much fun here? Because sometimes it is fun to just, write the extra snarky or extra pithy version of something, and then having an editor or a beta reader kind of rein me back in can be really helpful. So
Yeah. And it's really tough to see that when you're so close to your writing. All right, and that's why this kind of feedback is important. Even myself, my um not failing, where get clouded like that is when I'm writing a fight scene. I will happily write a sword fight for 20 pages if given the opportunity. And so I have people that say, Doug, this is too long. You gotta rein it back, man. So, but you don't know
yeah,
what you don't know until someone tells you.
yeah, exactly.
All right. And now we have some clarity here that I want to talk about. Specifically, one line. So they lock eyes. Dessa freezes, instant recognition lighting her face. And here's where we get to the clarity part. Struki is aware that Dessa uses her clothes and jewelry as her main point of identification, has caused a hilarious moment of confusion in the middle of their apartment because Struki failed to wear her ruby necklace when they encountered each other en route to the kitchen at 3 in the morning. But the rush of pleased warmth that flushes her cheeks is uncaring of such semantics. To be recognized is to be known, and Struki knows this with no other person than Dessa. First off, the last line that closes this paragraph off is again another just great piece of writing.
Yeah.
Jaden just is killing it all over the place. But the Struki is aware that Dessa uses her clothes and jewelry as her main point of identification, and then this little aside about a memory that they have. It doesn't have relevance, or it's not meant, like clothing isn't mentioned, jewelry is not mentioned on any point bordering this, and so it
Hmm.
just feels muddled. It feels kind of obscure, and we're left wondering why that's the case. And so I say that here, it doesn't seem to connect with the current situation. So in line editing stuff like this, sometimes we'll cut things out and you'll see what the suggestion is if we replace it or it's just gone. Other times we'll just leave a comment telling, like saying, hey, this is why we're having an issue here, and what you can maybe do to fix it, or just think about it and you can identify yourself for maybe something's missing. Okay, and then another big topic, and Jaden actually wasn't, like passive voice didn't come up a lot in Jaden's writing at all. It really only happened once or twice. In this case, Struki takes her elbow and leads her out of the fighting pit. They are immediately replaced by two other competitors. Each of them divert their path to give Dessa and Struki, for good measure, a solid slap on the back and a hearty laugh. They are immediately replaced by two other competitors is passive writing, because it is them, our subjects, Struki and Dessa, being acted upon by others. They are being replaced by other people. And it's not bad. Passive voice innately is not a terrible thing, but it does tend to be weaker and it tends to slow down your pace. And when, especially for Jaden with a like such a powerful voice, that does tend to be a little bit more verbose, and that's not a bad thing. Like that's just how the voice is. The slower your pace is, the more muddled it can get. So, but it's an easy replacement, right? And I did an extra replacement here, but we'll go here. Struki takes Dessa's elbow and leads her out of the fighting pit. Two other competitors waste no time taking their place. Each of them divert their path to give Dessa and Struki, for good measure, a solid slap on the back and a hearty laugh. It just makes it flow a little bit better, and that's the power of active voice. It's active. It pushes things along. So
Yeah. And I will say it gives you a bit more room to add your voice.
yeah,
You could add here like two other particularly ugly competitors or
yeah.
something, like just that you can add a little bit more detail, because you have that extra room from the revision. Not something you have to do, but you could add a little bit more voice into those moments. So
Yes. And so that people have some practice, if you want, I'm linking another article in W to correcting passive voice. Again, passive voice doesn't always have to be corrected. It is not wrong. It's just most of the time it can be active, and that usually makes it better. But
Hmm.
there are situations where passive voice is the better voice to use, especially if you want to slow things down and you want to be a bit more descriptive. Um, but you need to understand when you can and can't use it, or when you should or shouldn't use it. All right, we're almost through the feedback here. Uh, and this last piece of feedback is solely me praising Jaden's writing again, because I just apparently can't do it enough. So this is just some pros that I want to highlight. Dessa inhales through her nose. I don't know, Struki. Maybe they all just took a page out of your book. I sincerely doubt it. Struki's book, as Dessa puts it, is the type of item that results from an individual throwing it into the bottom of a travel bag and carting the thing around with them to the edges of the earth for the next 10 years, as all manners of items get thrown atop it. At the end of it all, the book is old, mangled, coffee-stained, and missing several pages. Struki may still enjoy paging through its contents, but the result is utterly unsellable. It's just so good. I
Hmm.
quite frankly, I wish I wrote this well more often than I can. It's just such a nice aside. It is a metaphor, like it's an extended metaphor that is done so poetically and fits the flow so well that it
Hmm.
feels natural, and it gives you such a good idea of how Struki's life has been up until this point.
Hmm. Yeah, it totally adds to this. Like we've got two broken people kind of coming together, right? And they know each other and they care about each other, and that is something beautiful to set up in your first chapter. And then it just adds to that. Like we have these two broken people who are going to go on this quest. I wonder how this is going to go. Like there's some relationship tension. There's some character tension just in themselves, in their flaws, in the ways that they perceive themselves, the ways they perceive each other. And so I agree. It's just beautifully written, and as I said before, the setup with the characters is just awesome. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I round things off always by giving some more overall thoughts when I provide feedback. So overall, excellent submission. If you can't tell by now, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. It immediately established a strong, distinct voice. There are fantastic character dynamics, but then from the other side, the voice does have a tendency towards weaker adverbs. So Jaden, just watch out for that. Some adverbs that you use are very strong, but incredibly excellently, those kind of things tend to be weaker. And then what we mentioned before we dove into the line editing is that vague world building, where we don't necessarily know where they are. And to be honest, until we figured out that they are reapers and spirits and stuff, I wasn't entirely sure we were super deep in the fantasy genre, or where in the fantasy genre we are. And I'm also not completely sure what time period we're at, because we have taverns, but we also make references to patios. And the colloquialisms in speaking fit well in a fantasy, but they can also be more urban fantasy. Like I'm not totally sure where we are in terms of a setting, which is more a developmental kind of edit, but it's something that I thought I'd point out.
Mhm.
So a big thank you to Jaden. That fantastic, great first Feedback Friday submission. I mean, the bar set super high. What I do want to do is just point out that we have a couple things coming up next week. Or sorry, Robert, do you have any final thoughts on this before I shamelessly plug our events next week?
Yeah, I got a final wrap up thought.
Okay.
Yeah, we were fortunate that Jaden's submission was very well written. But I don't want that to scare anyone away from future submissions to be like, oh, I have to have my prose perfect if I'm gonna submit it to Doug and Robert. We In every bit of writing that I have read as a beta reader, I've been in multiple writing groups. In every bit of those, I've always found something that I love about it. There is brilliance in every writer that is putting themselves out there, and so don't be afraid to submit if you don't feel like, oh, I just don't have the same like amazing voice that Jaden has, or I don't have, my prose isn't that tight. Like that's the point of feedback, is to get the feedback and to improve. And Jaden's piece, I think, is very polished, and so um, that has there's different feedback that we will give for a very polished piece, to get to those kind of final touches. Because I do think, if they take this feedback and give it, you know, uh, give it a once over with the feedback that we've given, I would consider that to be pretty close to final draft worthy, right?
Mhm.
But Feedback Friday's point is not just to get you from fifth draft to final draft. We are also happy to accept submissions of first draft and go through that. We kind of, the whole point of this event is we want to just get the idea out there of like, this is what feedback looks like, and the only way we can do that is if we get submissions through various parts of the writing process. And so that's my only point, is like, Doug and I thoroughly praised Jaden's work here. But I'd also say that we will also thoroughly praise a first draft's work, because there is brilliance everywhere. Just the kind of feedback that we will give will be different. And so Doug and I aren't mean people. We're not here to, we're not like here to just tear people's work apart. We're here to build writers up and to build you up, and also to show those areas of improvement that can help strengthen your writing. So that's my point
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to see writing from all stages of the process and from all skill levels. And hopefully this inspired some or instilled some confidence in the people watching that, yeah, we're not just going to shove your first draft up on screen and point and laugh at it, because that's so far from the point here. We just want
Mm-hmm.
to help you. We want to help everyone watching to find those things like adverbs and passive voice, and talk about flow and talk about what emotionally resonates with us and what doesn't. So you can just make your own writing better, even if it's not the one that we choose to or randomly draw to feature on here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But
the
yeah, if we point and laugh, it's because you've written a really good joke, and we'll definitely bring up
right,
really good jokes. So
yeah, like the mass casualty event.
yeah.
But shaken out of context, people might say, huh,
Yeah, if
that's
you're
a
just
joke,
tuning
Doug.
in, you might want to go back and watch the recording on when the mass casualty event came up. But
Yes, and Patricia said thanks, Jaden, in the chat. If you are available to chat or like on your phone or at a keyboard, just give a big thanks to Jaden for submitting this on Monday. Or Monday's a holiday, so perhaps Tuesday. Early next week, there will be another premium deep dive going out with a new theme for the next Feedback Friday, where people can submit your work for the chance to have it reviewed like this. Jaden, if you're watching, or if you're watching this later, you will get the feedback emailed to you today, probably before Robert goes away. And this will serve as a resource for you as well. Before I go to the event specifically, TW asked, are beta readers the same as editors? No. Editors come in many different shapes and sizes, and you bring them in at different stages in your drafting and your writing. Beta readers are generally not professionals like editors who will read your story and provide feedback, more like what Robert did, where it's more from a reader's perspective, from an emotional perspective, rather than going word by word or line by line and being a little more prescriptive about it. So thank you for that excellent question. There you
yeah,
go.
I
Thank
I
you.
added an article for the types of book editing, um, in Dabble U, and so that will hopefully help clarify what are the types of editors. But yeah, I think Doug explained the other differences there.
So next week we have some events on Tuesday, May 28th at 7 p.m. So later than a normal event, 7 p.m. Eastern. We have Level Up Your Author Mindset with Michael Aron. We're bringing him back because he's just so good at what he does. And he will be talking about the mindset that you can adopt to make your writing better, but also more enjoyable, because you need to find that balance of being an efficient writer or an effective writer and a happy writer and a passionate writer. So I'm really
Mm-hmm.
excited for that one. The following day, Wednesday, that would be May 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern, our normal time, I'm back here with you, and we are doing a workshop on writing dang good dialogue. And for that, we are going from the basics about formatting and punctuation and dialogue tags, all the way up to ways you can manage group conversations and how you can make your dialogue more authentic. So that's going to be a very good time. Also on Wednesday, it's not on here, but Writing Sprint Wednesdays, Robert's actually not in next week, right? You're
Yeah,
off. So
I'll be gone again.
Writing Sprint Wednesdays with Hank and Doug again. We had an excellent time on Wednesday, Robert. I think we wrote 5,500 words or something like that collectively.
Yeah,
Awesome.
awesome.
And then on Thursday, more Hank and Doug, where we have our office hours.
Just can't get enough.
Just can't. I love hanging out with everyone here on the lives, so I'm hoping to see you there. The office hours are an open Q&A, and if you want to submit a question, that will be in the newsletter that you'll get next week as well. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming to Feedback Friday. I hope you found it valuable. Thanks one more time to Jaden for this excellent piece of writing. And I hope everybody has a absolutely wonderful weekend.
And same for me. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I hope that watching the feedback process has been helpful. So,
yeah. Alrighty. Bye, everyone.